Welcome back to T Squared. This week's segment's on shopping centers and the malls of the future and where they're headed. We have the pleasure of Mr. Scott Schlecter joining us today. Scott, we've known each other for a while, and I know that you spent a lot of your career very close to this topic and probably one of the most knowledgeable people I know in this space.
Thank you, Trent. It's great to be here on T Squared. I've watched your other YouTubes and happy to be a part of this one.
Great. I think most people kind of have a pretty good sense of where malls have been, but maybe briefly just give us a sense of why in North America the mall, how it was created, how it came to be.
Well, the malls were very much a creature or came along with the suburbanization of our landscape in the post-World War II period. They became much more convenient ways to shop rather than having to get on public transportation, going downtown or looking for parking and so forth. Malls provided a level of convenience with the large open spaces and easy parking that made shopping so much easier for its patrons. Interestingly, the malls were originally anchored, as the saying goes, by large department stores, and the other stores that were called the inline stores that would often just line the mall between two anchored or two or more anchors in department stores were afterthoughts. Now with the department anchor stores having their challenges, the inline stores have become much more important to the health of a mall.
Didn't the department stores get quite a break though on the rents?
Yes, that's correct, Trent. Typically what would happen is a developer would buy a large plot of land and they would virtually give away the land to the anchor stores. The anchor stores, the Federateds, Macy's, Bloomingdale's and so forth, Sears and Penney's in many cases, would build the structures and own the structures, or sometimes have the developer build them for them, but still have very, very favorable terms. And the profits were made with the inline stores who wanted to be near these malls.
So a lot of this actually became ultimately a real estate play.
Oh, very much for the developer. Malls are a very important sector of U.S. real estate, and the largest mall owner, for instance, is Simon Properties, which has a market capitalization of around $50 billion.
What's this ABCD thing I hear about, different scale of mall, and what's the purpose of having an A, B, or a C mall? And then the other thing I think about is it seems that the pressure is more on those C and D malls right now.
That's very true. The designation ABCD is not a hard and fast, but generally an A mall would be north of $500 per square foot across the mall.
Sales per square foot.
Sales per square foot. A B mall would be 300 or better, and C would be below 300. D, I don't even think I want to think about because they don't last for long.
Okay.
It's generally been the case that once a mall slips below $300 a square foot, it can struggle. And if it goes too low, it becomes a death spiral because the lesser sales there are, the more tenants have difficulty staying in business and start to leave. And malls definitely can, from time to time, not often, but from time to time, do implode from lack of sales.
There seems to be a lot of, every time I read something about the death of the mall, it seems to be, I think it's exaggerated that malls are going away, or is it just they're going to be repurposed? Like, where's this heading? Is it?
Yes, I'd say the death of the mall is exaggerated, although there will be some malls that do die or get repurposed. Generally, I think there's something like 1,200 malls in the United States, often defined as retail space more than 500,000 square feet, usually but not always with enclosures. Century City Mall here, for instance, is not an enclosed space, but you certainly call that a mall. Those that are A malls above $500 per square foot are very safe, and the rents that tenants pay may not grow as quickly as they might have otherwise then. But the A malls will stay healthy. The B malls will probably survive, and C will struggle. An interesting side note about the sales per square foot is that Apple stores, for instance, are relatively recent entries into malls, and there you have an example of a new category coming in, replacing those categories that fade away. Apple stores are so productive, often have sales per square foot in the $5,000 per square foot. Right. And the ABC designation is often said you have to take away the Apple store before you do the computation.
Factor it out. Yeah, no, I heard about one one mall that's being repurposed, and it's actually going to be anchored by Italy, which I think is going into Century City, and an Apple. Those are becoming the two new anchors.
Right.
So you think as malls started to get into trouble, did the industry really see this coming? Did they get caught by surprise? Were there any indicators?
Well, the notion that retailing was going to be impacted by online sales certainly has not come about all of a sudden. It's been talked about ever since Amazon started to have a presence, and at first they just knocked out selective categories. So the malls saw that coming as all of a sudden their bookstores and then their record stores disappeared. But to date, there's always been new concepts, sufficient new concepts coming along in most malls that they've stayed healthy. So there's been a host of new concepts hit, like I mentioned, the electronic stores. So we have Apple stores and Microsoft stores, usually one or more. Sony, one or more. There's going to be one or more cellular company stores in there. And there's lots of new concepts like entertainment concepts, whether it be Dave & Buster's or bowling alleys, and more things that bring people to the mall.
Yeah, you had mentioned before it was more of that sort of sense of community.
Right, it's today's town square. It's
right.
A town square. People like to gather. People do like to still go to places. So now they may not buy as much merchandise at the mall, but they may very well spend as much time there. That, of course, will affect the economics of the stores and the malls, and they will need to adjust to that.
Anyone today you think is doing a great job of sort of the new version of the mall?
It's case by case. You raised an interesting point I'd like to expand on. Most malls are not branded. So we think about here in LA, whether it be West Side Pavilion or Santa Monica Place or Beverly Center, we don't really know who the parent company is. The one exception to that is Westfield,
right,
which is an Australian company, and they make sure you know that it's a Westfield mall. And although one might ask, well, so what? Because I don't know if I feel any different about going to a Westfield mall. There's lots of red flags,
yeah,
but other than that, there's no tangible difference.
Yeah, what is the brand? You know,
what does it stand for?
Right.
That's a good question. It's something the mall companies have pondered. There's a little bit of frequent shopper programs with Simon and General Growth, which is the other big U.S. real estate trust that owns malls.
What about Caruso with Americana and the Grove? And
well, that's another good point, which is that one of the recent trends has been more what Caruso here has built in LA, in a couple of examples, even more of the town square village almost concept rather than the big institutional mall. So those centers are open air, generally 400 to 600,000 square feet at the low end of what one might categorize at a mall, and more of a feel of you want to be there rather than just a place to shop.
Yeah, and then I guess the whole off-price piece of this, you know, some of these former anchors now have more stores in the off-price centers than they do in the regular price malls.
That's right. An interesting offshoot of the mall business is the factory outlet sector, which as it developed tended to be in very out-of-the-way places, often in vacation spots, a place like Lake Arrowhead or
Calzone on the way to
Tahoe or whatever, yeah, or Barstow on the way to Vegas.
Right.
Increasingly, the outlet centers have been encroaching on the urban centers. So we have one in Camarillo out here, a very successful outlet center, also owned by Simon, that's only 45 minutes from where we live here, and attracts a big crowd. The outlet center is a very, very interesting business because they're very cheap to build. The land is not necessarily hard to find for an outlet center. The structure is bare bones. But often an outlet center can have the same sales productivity as a large mall, and therefore able to charge comparable rents to what a downtown location can charge.
Inside the four walls of a department store, it's pretty much curated by brand and adjacencies. It's pretty well thought out. Is there that same approach taken by the mall owner in terms of curating the mall itself, in terms of those adjacencies and end uses?
I think that's been a recent development, and certainly the stronger mall operators increasingly are thinking along those lines. But that's been a more recent evolution, in large part because we mentioned in the history of the malls that in the early days the inline stores were kind of just a bit of an afterthought. It was really about the department stores, and many tenants have been there with 10-year leases and so forth, and it's not as easy to move those tenants around
Sure.
as you can within a department store. You don't have the flexibility to do that. Sometimes even malls will pay tenants if they want to move them around. So increasingly there's the mindset of have certain sections, such as a women's fashion section or a services section within that. There's also some thought given if you have, for instance, 2 jewelry stores. You don't want them right next to each other. You'll want them maybe at opposite ends, so that the consumer has to walk from one end of the mall to the other and pass a lot of other stores to comparison shop.
Feels kind of like the grocery store idea where they've got you going to the far corners to get your basics.
That's exactly right. And in fact, some malls, rather than have the efficient escalators from each floor, will actually make you walk the whole length of the mall to get from the escalator from 1 to 2 to the escalator to 2 to 3.
Yeah, I don't want to be in the emergency situation where you're trying to figure out how to get out.
Yeah, sometimes they don't want you to get out so quickly. You're here to shop.
I'm going to carry my own fire extinguisher with me. Scott, thank you very much. That was illuminating. I always learn a lot from you particularly on this topic, and thank you for coming out. Welcome your comments on T Squared for Scott or myself on the topic, and look forward to seeing you next time on T Squared. Thanks for coming out.